easily about what they know. Just as if we were to be time travelers going back 1,000 years, how would we talk to people of any society of 1,000 years ago? How would we be able to tell them the things that we know? It might be difficult. I think that's something that we need to consider that's already happened. I'll do a little quick glimpse into my forthcoming book, Volume 3, which I have tentatively subtitled The Fight for Disclosure, and it will cover the year 1992 to the present. I have really, nearly all of my research for that is done. It's one reason it took this book so long, is I ended up doing research for Volumes 2 and 3 all at once. So I think it'll be a lot less time for me to do this book. This is just off the top of my head on the plane flying here, my thoughts on how this book is going to come together. The internet revolution, obviously, I don't think needs to be gainsaid here. What also happened in the 90s is an explosion of reported UFO sightings. It's incredible. Go to the National UFO Reporting Center on the web, run by Peter Davenport, and you'll find he catalogs about 5,000 UFO sightings each year. Now, most of these don't get investigated, clearly. They're what you'd call raw reports, but they're pretty interesting. I myself investigated 2 cases out of that database, and I came away feeling that both of those were legitimate. I'm not saying all of these cases are legitimate, but I think a lot of them probably are. And the fact is that in our own age, it's easier and easier now to report this. There's no official government body that you can report this to, which is a failure of our republic, very much so, because frankly, if you encounter what is the most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life, one would think there should be an agency in your government that is charged with dealing with it. That's why the government is supposed to be responsive to you, right? And yet there isn't any. But yet there are places on the web. And it's easier and easier to report it, so we get there's an enormous amount there. There have been the release, not just of some legitimate documents, really the glory age of freedom of information, I think, was in the late 70s, but what we've had since then are continued releases of official documents, but also the release of a lot of disputed documents. These are the so-called majestic documents. You can read all of them at the website of Ryan and Bob Wood. I think that a very good case can be made for the authenticity of many of those documents, but the point is that they're disputed, and what that means is they're of unknown provenance. And again, it served to muddy the waters of this field. I think it's important that we continue to try to do research on those documents to try to authenticate them or not. There have been a lot of initiatives in the 90s and in our own century toward disclosure. I'll deal with the Rockefeller Initiative, the whole Roswell GAO, General Accounting Office fiasco of the early 90s under the Clinton years. The efforts of Dr. Stephen Greer in the 90s leading up to his press conference in 2001 is very important. The efforts of my friend, Stephen Bassett, I think figure into this equation. The sci-fi/John Podesta event of a couple of years ago, all of these are important. In other words, what I think we're seeing is very much an increase in the attempts now for citizen groups publicly to grab this issue and make major statements about the need to end the cover-up. Much, much greater than had ever happened in the past, much, much more so. There's also a very significant part, this conference is obviously a very strong reflection of this, is the growth of what we might call higher consciousness attitudes within the UFO community. Back in the 80s and 70s, there was a little bit of this. If you go back further to the 1950s, certainly what we would call the contactees would be considered sort of new agey for their time, without a doubt. But really, I think this is a different order of magnitude, what we've been experiencing through the 1990s. I think it's probably connected with greater communication through avenues like the internet. Certainly, it's an important part of what's going on, and it's something that I'll need to deal with in an appropriate way in my book. The other big thing geopolitically is the death of the nation state. The New World Order, okay? This is probably the greatest unremarked upon, at least in the mainstream, event of our lifetimes, at least geopolitically. Nations, I don't even know what a nation is anymore. Do they even exist? You have groups of people living with the same language in an area. Is that a nation? Who's sovereign? Are you sovereign? Are we sovereign in our country? Well, we are in theory, and we must continue to fight for this. In reality, our world has become something very different. And this has got to be part of any study of the UFO reality in the last 20 years, because again, we have to understand the true nature of the structure of power. Thanks. I'm told I have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to, I have no idea I'm going to get this all done. Because that was only the first of my 3 sections, so what can I tell you? Oh well. A new exopolitics. Well, maybe that's an overly dramatic statement. Look, anytime we're going to talk about exopolitics, that is a relationship of us and them, well, those are the 2 variables, us and them. And we have to have a clear understanding of both of these variables to be able to talk intelligently about what we will call exopolitics. It's got to be done. So, through all of this as well, it is essential, absolutely essential, that we ask ourselves, how do we know what we know? What is our source of data? And who are we saying this to? What I mean here is that if we're going to be talking about other entities in the galactic civilization, we'd better damn well back up what we say with something other than I got this through a remote viewed bit of information or through direct contact with an alien being. I'm very sorry, that's not enough. It may be enough in a private conversation with other researchers if that's what you believe. Everyone's entitled to have their beliefs. I speculate all the time. But we do ourselves a disservice as a community when we go fast and loose with this kind of thing. We've got to be more disciplined with how we speak to the world. How would it be if when you get an opportunity to say what we're believing to a larger media organization, we just go off with this and look ridiculous? We're not in a position where we really can afford to do that. We have to be more careful. We can speculate, but we must distinguish between what we know and what we believe. They're not the same. It's not hard to do. It just means qualifying one's statements a little bit, okay? I don't think that's asking too much. Let's look at us a little bit. Let's understand who we are. What we've had is a situation where we've been retrieving exotic technologies. Now, there's a big statement by me, I grant. It is something that I believe I back up sufficiently in my book. There's been a great deal of information on this. Everyone knows about the Roswell case, and there are many others, frankly. These technologies, this is my hypothesis here, okay, have to be kept secret. You got a Cold War going on back in those days. You can't let the Russians see what we got. Requiring secret budgetary appropriations, i.e. the creation of a black budget. The UFO phenomenon is almost certainly a key factor in the creation of the black budget world that we have today. Not the only one, but one of the key motivators, I think. Privatization, I'm just going to have to run through this. Runaway technological achievements. This is our secret infrastructure. That's part of us. Okay. Now, this is messy. You could tell I did this on a plane. When most of us, I'm excluding the present company here, but I think most people go through their lives with the assumption that we get our sources of information from like the media, and that would include TV, but also internet. We have a political system, we have an academic community in which there's a back and forth kind of exchange there, so that they also are responsive to us, in theory. The media, of course, we're told, well, they give the public what the public wants. And the academic world, of course, is supposed to be responsive to the inherent value of truth. And there's a back and forth there. The political system is supposed to be responsive to us, throw the bums out, and so forth. How is it really? Well, this is how I think things have actually shaped up. You've got the arrow's going one way here. It's going at you. And it's not just media and the politics and the academics, there's a corporate system in place. This